This one's a little interesting, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's another one of the Tiemans questions. It's from Joshua Tiemans. He says, when looking into the truly horrifying conditions that have been present for most of the history of man, conditions that would be unthinkable here, the kind of conditions where for you and I, we question whether it's worth being alive. When looking at these things, how do you come to grips with the fact that you were spared all of that? How do you come to grips with the fact that not only were you spared, but also the fact that it was not bound to happen to some generation of humans? It was, in fact, extremely unlikely, the life we live now. But yet, here we are. We live like the gods on Mount Olympus compared to the natural state of things, even when compared with the rest of the world today. How do you come to grips with that? That's a profoundly good question, a deep question. To be perfectly honest with you, Joshua, if you just raised that question and made some pale answer to try and answer it on a yearly basis, we wouldn't be any trouble at all. All of our problems today are as a result of ingratitude and an absolute intentional blackout of information in terms of what life is like in history, what life is like in the world today, in the third world. I had a realization about this many years ago when I first started thinking about it. And I thought about the third world. I'd been to the third world. The guy who made it okay for me to be a conservative, P.J. O'Rourke, basically, was talking about in his book, his incredible book, Eat the Rich, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's probably the most influential book I've ever read. One of the top 3 or 4, anyway. He was talking about going through the Ukraine, I think he was. And he said you'd come to these villages in the Ukraine, and you would see these running sewers outside of people's houses, just running sewers, just human filth, right outside your door. And he said, as I recall, you can't blame this on race, you can't blame this on culture or anything. These people are as white as they get, they're as Caucasian as they can be, because there are the Caucasus Mountains. But he said, an American cannot look at this and not have a thought. And the thought was, for $200 in an hour at Home Depot, I could fix this and it would be fixed forever. It would not be a problem again. They'd have sanitation forever. $200 and an hour at Home Depot. So why doesn't it get done? It's never been done. It's always been done this way. Our fathers did it. It's been this way in every village. It's been this way in this village since the dawn of time. So, I had that thought, and I thought, what's wrong with these people? What's wrong with them? What's wrong with the people in Thailand? I went to Thailand. I thought the Thai people were as kind and as nice as they could possibly be. Absolutely lovely, warm people. The ones I met, I couldn't say enough about them. I thought they were grand. But it's a sewer, and there are open garbage dumps right next to expensive Western hotels. Why don't they do any maintenance? Why did the power cables hang down so that people's heads are brushing against them? Why are there no traffic signs? Why isn't anybody wearing helmets? Why? Why is life so cheap? Why are things so dirty? Why does nothing work? Why is it that if you take a cell phone or a satellite dish or a pickup truck or something, you drop it into this third world, that it stays there until it rots, and then once it's rotting, they can't fix it, and they certainly can't make new ones? Why? What's wrong with them? And that's when I had this thunderbolt, this just lightning flash right between the eyes. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong with them. This is human history. This is human nature. This is what people have been for their entire lives. For as long as there have been people, that's been what there is. That's human beings in action. The third world is humanity. They're not the freaks. We're the freaks. We're the freaks. And once you understand that, everything starts to make sense. Because then you begin to realize that because we grow up in this bubble of security and prosperity that's brought to us by the hard work of honest businessmen, which is the enormous majority of businesses, and the hard work of not only the businessmen and the entrepreneurs, but the people who get up every morning and go to work. They've generated enough wealth for this country, sent that wealth out into China and out into India and the rest of the world. They've made the world rich through their hard work. And they've kept that freedom and that prosperity as the result of the sacrifice of the men and women in our armed forces. So we're the freaks. And there's we are genetically self-selected to be freaks. All the people that got sick and tired of living in sewers and got sick and tired of handing the chickens or the scrawny potatoes into a basket and giving it to the Duke or the Earl or whatever, all the people said, screw this. Got on a boat or a wagon or a cart or loaded a bindle and threw some things into a blanket and wrapped it up, threw it over the shoulder, went somewhere else, came here, and here we are, Freak Nation. One of the people I talked to at a cocktail party last Friday at a fundraiser for Hillsdale College was also in the armed forces as I can't tell you what he did, but he's a highly placed guy at the tip of the spear. And he said, you talk about the third world, but he said there is a second world, you know. He said even Europe is not America. It's not there. It's not quite there. It's true. Poor Americans have more living space than middle-class Europeans. Poor Americans have a much higher chance of having air conditioning, much higher chance of having a cell phone, much higher chance of having a car than middle-class Europeans. So, yeah, Freak Nation. And so the question is, how do you come to grips with it? One of the things you have to do is you have to understand how rare it is. I think the reason that Afterburner I did called 3.5 Days did the kind of business it did. It was on the news cycle. Let me just get this up a little bit higher. It was on the news cycle. That didn't hurt with Occupy Wall Street. But what 3.5 Days was about, really, when you get right down to it, is don't take this stuff for granted. People are out there working their tails off so that you don't have to go and skin animals and cart your own water and, you know, don't take it for granted. Be grateful. Go spend 3 days out in the wilderness and boil your own water and catch snakes or rabbits and skin them alive and do all these other horrible things that everybody else in the world has to do all the time. And then you'll appreciate what you've got here. But the reason that I was so moved to take the question, to be honest with you, is because the term likelihood, that's really what it comes down to for me. When I think about my existence, I think obviously, you know, luck and fortune and all this other stuff. But I think about just the unlikelihood of it, the rarity, you can't. How do you not go through life filled with the sense of not just gratitude, just kind of awe at how unlikely this is that you were born in this country and have all these opportunities and freedoms compared to the rest of the world, compared to human history. You know, one of the things I'll say often when I talk about wealth creation is I'll say, you know, 100 years ago, the wealthiest Americans in the world, or the wealthiest Brits in the world for that matter, would go to a giant event, and they might, if they were really showing off, show up in a carriage drawn by 8 horses. More likely they'd show up in a carriage drawn by 4 horses. When I go to an event, I show up in a carriage drawn by 360 horses, and I'm not the richest American by a long margin. You know, it's astonishing. It's astonishing. And it's not just a crime to not appreciate it. It's an actual honest-to-God sin. So, you know, the way you come to grips with it is you just have to appreciate it. You just have to be grateful for it, and you have to just be thankful and understand how rare it is and how lucky you are, and don't take it for granted, and do everything you can to try to preserve it. I do what I can to try to preserve it, and I work my tail off as hard as I possibly can. That's what I do to kind of earn it, and I think you kind of end up with that Saving Private Ryan kind of moment, right? I mean, isn't that the thing that was the most moving about that movie, is that moment at the end when it's like, you know, there's Ben Affleck, there's Private Ryan, all these guys have died so that he can live. How do you handle that debt? How do you handle that burden? We were talking about this earlier tonight. How do you handle the guilt? How do you handle the guilt? And the answer is you just earn it. You know, earn it. Go out and earn it. Do something to keep it going, and do something to pass it on. That's a great question. It's really, really interesting. I do think about it all the time.